125 million skiers and snowboarders. People are always amazed. It's twice the size of golf. And lo and behold, Sean is retiring and he's thinking about starting this new league. But at the end of the day, it was really about pulling the sport together and make it so that you can tell the story of the athletes throughout a season. And at the end of the season, crown a world champion.
Hello and welcome to the Sports Pundit Podcast, the show for people shaping the future of sport. Driven by my curiosity working in the industry, I've brought together leading executives to host conversations with decision makers across innovation, marketing, media, finance, and performance, unpacking their strategies and industry-shaping ideas.
On this episode of the Sports Pundit Innovation Podcast, I'm joined by Omer Atesmen, CEO of the Snow League, an emerging sports property redefining how we experience snow sports. Omer's journey spans entrepreneurship, technology leadership, and a passion for creating radically new formats in sport and other industries. Through the Snow League, he's spearheading a shift away from traditional events towards a unified, entertainment-driven sports league. In this conversation, we'll unpack Omer's personal journey, the genesis of the Snow League, the vision behind it, and the art and science of innovating in a world of sport. So without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Omer. Omer, welcome.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
And you're calling in from the East Coast, I believe?
Yeah, I recently got transplanted to the East Coast. My wife is an East Coaster and spent many years in California, but now I'm in Greenwich, Connecticut.
Oh, very nice. Okay. Quite the difference?
It is, but you know what? I've got young kids, and so seasons, things you don't have in Los Angeles where it's 72 and sunny all the time is exciting for myself and the kids.
Yes. And I think, it would be ironic if you were the Snow League living in California, right? So, it's good to have you on today. As we always do with the Sports Pundit, we really love to kick off by getting to know you and your kind of story, I think, and your journey, which has been an incredible one to get to where you have today. So we'd love to dig into your background and really how you landed here today.
So, first of all, if you can tell from my name, some people might recognize I'm Turkish. I was born in Istanbul. And when I was a year old, my parents decided to move to Santa Barbara in California. It was, I think, my mom's decision. My dad's like, I really want to come to the United States for a better chance. And my mom said, well, either Santa Barbara or Florida. I think she liked warm weather or the thought of it. So I ended up in Santa Barbara as a little kid. And then I grew up and went to Stanford. I was an electromechanical engineer at Stanford. Wow. And my stories, you can tell, it'll be a bit winding as how I ended up in sports. But even before that, I thought I was going to be a doctor, to be honest. So I studied I took the pre-med and so I took the MCAT here in the United States, and then decided, all right, I'm going to be an engineer like my dad. But I always had this entrepreneurial itch. And so, and you go to Stanford and a lot of people, think about entrepreneurship. And right after Stanford, I ended up going to a robotics company. I was one of the first people at this robotics company, and I literally would build circuit boards, and I built maybe 100 circuit boards and all these robots that had to do with the biotech industry. And then I realized I'm not the best engineer in the world. I'm not that passionate about it. So I did what a lot of people do is I figured I'd go to business school. So I went to business school because I thought I really want to, I really want to be running these companies. I really enjoy thinking about the strategy and the overall direction of the company. So went off to Chicago, went to business school, and then came back to California and worked for the Boston Consulting Group for a couple of years because I knew I was going to be an entrepreneur. So I figured some management consulting with Fortune 100 companies was always going to suit me to kind of round out my experience. And then I started an ad tech company after that. And after that ad tech company sold, I said, all right, now my third entrepreneurial venture, I really want to lean into something I'm passionate about. And I grew up playing a lot of sports, and I grew up skateboarding, grew up snowboarding, but I also played tennis and soccer, you name it. And I was also, as you can tell, very into education. So I decided I would start a company that was like a master class, but for sports and wellness. So I ended up filming Michael Phelps teaching swimming, Maria Sharapova teaching tennis, Megan Rapinoe teaching soccer, And that's where I met Sean. I taught him, he was one of 23 athletes. We would film for usually 3 to 4 days. And then we'd have all this content, usually about 2 hours worth of content for lessons on and off the field.
Mm-hmm.
Fast forward, NBC Sports takes over all that content about 2 years ago. And lo and behold, Sean is retiring and he's thinking about starting this new league. There's a great opportunity to do it. There's all this business sense behind it. And we reconnected, and I was finishing up with the skills, and he asked me if I'd be interested in maybe running the league. And here we are today.
Amazing. Yeah. I mean, was it biotech, ed tech, education tech,
Right.
to now sports, and sports innovation for sure. Right.
Yeah.
So you probably never thought you'd ever spend this much time thinking about half pipes, but very cool that you come from the culture, I think, of boarding, skateboarding, snowboarding. It does feel kind of full circle, I suppose.
Yeah. My very first skateboard was from a guy named Steve Caballero, and he was kind of like one of the original guys in skateboarding. Somehow my parents knew him in Santa Barbara, and I wasn't the best skateboarder, but I still have that board today. And then when I went to Stanford, I got season passes. My roommate was a really good skier. And so I ended up snowboarding with skiers most of the time. So it was kind of all mountain boarding, and I didn't spend as much time in the half pipe or the train park as I wanted. So I actually went to High Cascade Snowboard Camp, which is something that Sean is a big part of that now, and Owen's part of that. So I did that when I was a kid. I think the best trick I ever did was a backside 360 or 540.
Wow.
Compared to I mentioned that to all the athletes when we had our first event in March. I said, the best I've ever done. They all clapped. I mean, all these guys and girls that can do, 3-4 spins at a time. I can barely do 1 or 2. But it means a lot to me. I was actually president of the ski and snowboard club at Northwestern at business school.
Oh, amazing. Yeah.
And there was about 700 people in that club. So, and I've continued in my personal life, my longest threads of friendship are with the group I go skiing with or snowboarding.
Yeah, right.
With, so.
Amazing. I mean, it's cool, right? I think, no wonder they clap, because I think they could probably go, well, just as a CEO, we'd accept you for your business kind of now. But the fact you can do that too, it really kind of completes it. And I'm a skier because I've given snowboarding a go a few times, but I find I just spend so much time on the ground. It's not for me.
I think most of us, Sean started on skis, I believe, like his first couple of days, if I remember. Don't quote me on that one, but I started on skis too. And I think I have my kids on skis. I think there's something about starting with skis and then, transitioning over to snowboarding. Actually, I think the story is because we were just in Japan and China, Sean, and he mentioned this. It's not that he started on skis. It is that when he was asked by someone in Japan, would you suggest to start on skis or snowboard? And he said, it's kind of up to you. But he was a fan of starting on skis. So there's a lot of technique that can, with snow and edges, that
transfer. Yeah, right. Okay, cool. Now, because we're already, into Sean and, really kind of his background, I'm going to assume and take a wild stab that most of my listeners will understand who Sean is. But give us a bit of his background, his why. I've heard you speak about this before, but it sort of did feel like the stars were kind of coming together at the time of his career that sort of made sense. But yeah, tell us the story of the Snow League, the vision, the why now, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So obviously Sean's in the most incredibly unique position to kind of lead the sport into the future. He's kind of been at, the heart of the sport for so many years. And as, when COVID hit, there was this situation where there were all these one-off events prior to COVID. And there was Burton, who was sponsored by it for a long time. They had US Opens, and they had a Japan Open and European Opens. And then you had X Games doing their winter event. And then you had, the Dew Tour from Mountain Dew. And so all of these brands had these events kind of as vehicles for the brand. And so for X Games, it was something that was developed by ESPN and Disney. And then there was the Burton for, selling Burton goods would put on these events as a promotional thing. And then when COVID hit, Burton decided that they were going to stop doing the US Opens, obviously due to the pandemic. But then when the pandemic came out, they decided that they were going to move away from that event. And so you had a situation where you had all these individual events that were great, but there was a couple of them went away. And then on top of it, there was no continuity between the events. So
that's right.
If you went to X Games and performed well, great. And if you went to a Burton US Open, great. But and this goes to the business side, like they weren't coordinated on telling a story across the calendar season. How is this person, doing compared to the next person? And then eventually crowning the champion at the end of the season. So he always tells this story, Sean does, of going through an undefeated season one year where he entered all these events and won everything. And he gets to the end and he was told by a reporter, how does it feel not to be the world champion? And he was like legitimately confused. And I think that's like, the kind of the impetus for all of this is to sort of unify the sport and to put it in a place where both men and women, skiers and snowboarders, can compete. And we use F1 as kind of a North Star for us. And the reason we use that is in part because it has a touring model that goes around the world. So they have, about 23 stops, I believe, and you get points at every stop, and eventually at the end you have a season champion. And, we thought our sport is done in these beautiful mountain locations. You go to Aspen in Colorado, you go in Switzerland, whether it's St. Moritz or Laux, or Beijing, where they held the Olympics. And it's a very global and international sport. So about a third of our athletes out of Asia, a third out of Europe, a third out of North America, and a sprinkling elsewhere. And so he wanted to bring the whole sport together on a global scale and make it so that you can tell the story of the athletes throughout a season, and at the end of the season, crown a world champion. Now, there's a lot of things he wanted to change about it too, like head-to-head competition. But at the end of the day, it was really about pulling the sport together and putting it in a place that was much better than, where he left it. And I think that's always like, there's a lot of responsibility there for him. I feel a lot of responsibility building that with him, given his name and who he is. But it's really admirable that he wants to, make it so that these athletes don't have to have a second job and that they can really focus on the sport themselves. So it's a really exciting vision, and we're able to kind of take things from scratch and build them up, since we're able to go to the laboratory with him and say, how would we do this differently? Like, what is important for the athletes that we're not doing right now? And kind of start from there.
No, very cool. I mean, I think, it totally makes sense. Whenever there's kind of inefficiencies in a market, just by bringing it together and consolidating it, it makes sense from a business point of view. Like you said, you've got the F1, but you also have the World Surf League or SailGP, a similar sort of model where you might collect points and tour the world. And then tell me, lots of people, I'm assuming, would have started this going, you guys are crazy. This is nuts. Who got it immediately? Did you get it immediately? And who thought you were crazy here?
That's a really good question. I always like to think I'm a little bit crazy at the beginning of any venture I do. And I say that in a one of the most, this is my fourth company I've built from the ground up. And so there's a lot of similarities behind doing your diligence, like on a company. And I think in sports in particular, this becomes really important because it's a very bright and shiny object. So I told Sean, well, give me a little bit of time to do my diligence on the business itself. And there were a lot of pieces of that puzzle. We brought in my COO, Ian Warda. He ran all these events at Burton. So he's the best person in the world to be running the operations of these events. He came in, we met, we looked at the P&Ls, his view on how we would build the league, the costs. We looked at the revenues. I then started to pull data on the globality of the sport. So 125 million skiers and snowboarders. People are always amazed. It's twice the size of golf.
Golf, yeah. I've heard you say that.
It's much bigger than other sports, and it's multi-generational, 8 to 80 years old. It's really well spread around the world, and you all have men and women equally out there competing and enjoying the sport. And on top of that, it's number one in household income. So when you look at the business from like the ability to say, is this something that we can commercialize? That there was a lot of data behind that, not to mention really good Nielsen numbers and people watching the sport. So I think, yes, like to sort of step into something and say, oh, we're going to do this global tour. We're going to do an event in China, and we're going to do an event in the US, and we're going to do an event in Europe, and then we're going to grow from there. It's pretty, you always bite off a lot, and going to China is very complicated. We're going there in December. So we have to have new social media channels. We have to set up a whole event in China, which is, has its own, operational challenges, and our teams over there are doing great. So that I'm kind of used to. But I think at the end, it's generally, I try to ground it in some real due diligence, and I try to make sure that I say, what am I missing? Like, why won't this work? What about this idea? And that comes from me being an entrepreneur my whole life. Is I always think that people are just assume, oh, this will always work, this will be positive. But I know in sports, there's plenty of examples where people start things and it doesn't have the product market fit. It doesn't have people watching it enough. It doesn't commercialize enough. And everyone thinks you'll be maybe the NFL, or you model out your business like the NBA or the NFL or European soccer. That doesn't happen. You have to get there. So I guess I temper the crazy with some pretty heavy analysis behind the scenes to make sure that we're around in 5 years. And that's what is good for the athletes, the investors, everyone involved.
Yeah, for sure. No, I love that I think this is because you're an entrepreneur and you've come into this with that mindset. But you come in with product market fit. I'm a person that's had a lot of background in sport. And I think where sport needs to go is that mentality, right? Where you go, what does the market need today? Not how the models of the past worked.
Right.
And I've heard you talk about this product market fit before. And I think that brings that mentality of like, let's go back to first principles here, understand what the market needs, and then build this product for that market. And, I can see that I've heard you bring across your COO, was it? And I think I've heard you speak previously, and I'd love to know more around your kind of ethos for pulling in people maybe from different angles. Maybe they're not from a background of snow, for example, or sport. But yeah, tell me a bit about that.
Yeah, and this was something Sean and I talked about really early in the process was, I had to some degree, 1 foot in the sport, just having done it and passionate about it, but I didn't work in snowboarding. And then I have 1 foot outside where I've done a lot of other businesses, but I just love watching sports, like you'll catch me with the soccer on or American, football on, whatever it is. I just love watching sports. So when we built the team, the goal was to bring a diverse team into place. Our operations team is more skewed towards being endemic to the sport. They have operated on snow. They know that when you're filming up there, you gotta bring some boots and you gotta
authenticity.
Exactly. So our operations team comes from inside the sport and knows what they're doing to operate these events. Sean comes from inside the sport completely and knows everything about, the athletes and the culture. And he's obviously, in a unique position, one of one. And then we brought in our marketing team, and we brought in our partnerships team, and we brought in our tech team. And those people came from various other places. So my CFO, he was actually one of my good friends from Stanford. And he's spent almost 2 decades at Meta in finance roles at Meta. He's also an ex-Navy diver. So he was on a minesweeper. So he would disarm mines in the Persian Gulf. That's a whole separate story from my Boston consulting days about.
I need to get him on the podcast.
Yeah. Folks that have worked in the military are often very, very good consultants because there's a rigor to it. And so anyway, so we have, John from Meta, and then we have a bunch of our partnerships team and our comms people that have worked in other parts of sports, whether it's cricket, NFL, NBA, and you bring all that together. And I think you see what's happening is the output of that. There are some like very clear pieces. I think one piece from me, which is just more of a product market fit tech kind of entrepreneur background, is do one thing really well.
Yeah, for sure.
And so that's why we focus first on half pipe.
Okay.
And men's and women's snowboarding and men's and women's skiing in the half pipe. And then we do it over a season and we crown a champion. And if you look at all the other events that in the past, they tend to do lots of different disciplines. And that's great. But we wanted to just say, look, we're going to focus on this one event. We're going to make the experience amazing. We're going to make the broadcast product amazing. Yep. And we can only really do that because we have fixed resources. We can only really do that if we're not worried about like putting on a lot of other things. Yeah. So, there's that. Well, I think that's a little outside the sport to kind of look at it that way. Then
that's right. Yeah.
We start to look at like content and our graphics and look at how it compares to Sunday Night Football or a European Championship in soccer. And all that stuff starts to layer into, okay, head-to-head competition and, tennis, best of 3 sets in women. We have best of 3 runs. We have a quarterfinals, a semifinals, and a finals. So it's been really fun to kind of take all these disparate views and bring them in, and generally go, the key stuff goes through Sean, and Sean, and a lot of it comes from Sean, the idea of the competition structure and how we do it. So it's exciting. It's a diverse group, and we're not doing everything right,
No. But you're affording yourself that space to experiment here too, right? I think you're going back, design. I love the way you've gone with a wedge, like you said, like this is very much, no doubt, from your entrepreneurial days, is like, let's find something, let's do that really well, and we can expand from that platform once we've done that. But let's not try to do everything all at once.
And I think if you talk to the athletes that way too, and you explain to them, there's a feedback loop here.
That's right.
We're going to make these adjustments because we think these are the best things for this league going forward. And oh, by the way, the NFL, it might be 100 years old or more, and it's still changing every year. So be certain that we will be changing, like season 2. We'll tweak some things and we'll make adjustments and we'll listen. And I think that's one of the I guess when you've done enough of these and you've seen the ups and downs of any startup, you always know that it's a process.
Iterative, right? Yeah.
This podcast is produced by O6, but more than just being a production partner, they're also active members of the Sports Pundit community. Having seen the work they're doing across the industry up close, working with leading F1 teams and Premier League clubs, as well as top creators, I'm so delighted to now have them on board and helping to elevate this show to a new level.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting is sports sometimes gets this kind of like set and forget. Not maybe it's not quite fairly to say it like that, but we shouldn't change. Whereas the world changes around us, and sport also has to change. So I think that freedom to kind of move with the times, adapt, is really important. And from what I've heard you speak about, you often referencing, say, the NFL and the Formula One, and these things are pretty well embedded. They've been around for a very long time. They were built for a different time. F1 is possibly a very good example of things that have adapted and gone out and done things kind of differently with their drive to survive, etc. But I'm curious, are you looking at more of these alternative leagues as well? Things like Baller, Kings League, Unrivaled, Sail GP. Do you look to them for, I guess, inspiration on how you might approach what you're doing here and what you're building?
Oh yeah, so our investor group, world class, and happens to be investors in a lot of these, whether it's Tigers Golf League, Kings League, the new chess, but what's interesting is so we are able to kind of get a pretty good insight into how they're what they're doing, and in a lot of cases, you start to realize these are very one-off things. So Love B, the volleyball league, they have these youth clubs and we don't. And someone else, Paul Rabel with his lacrosse league is a very domestic sport here in the US. Yeah. We have more of an international audience, and so you kind of take all these pieces together. But the fun part of it, I would say, is that even within the more traditional sports, you start to really identify people that are doing it differently. And I'll give you two examples. I was just for Conline Sports Beach, I was just in the south of France in June, and I spent time with the CEO of Overtime. And Overtime on the basketball side is really changing thought about how youth is consuming, basketball. And it works with the NBA. It's complementary and to a large degree. And we think about that as we think about how do we deliver content to especially youthful audience around the world. And then I think about it was just on a call with Sean, and we were talking about Wrexham. Like just to think of that. And now there's a bit of a playbook that people are trying to replicate there, but to think about how you use storytelling and kind of inject life into the communities and the people who are passionate about the sport through the league is really exciting. So even within, long-standing sports, I think you can find these disruptors. And at the end of the day, we kind of have a lot of good examples to pick and choose from. And I would say that there's no one league that necessarily fits us perfectly. So we take the pieces that make sense.
That's right. Yeah. Borrow what you need and leave behind what you don't, but build your own thing at the end of the day. Right. And that, that's super interesting. I'm also a big fan of Dan Porter and Overtime and what they're doing, as well as many, and the investors behind you. I know their portfolio is sort of second to none, in my opinion, of what I think will forge the future of sport and show even these kind of legacy traditional models where to go. And then touching on that, I guess, coming to the business model side of things, traditionally, the big revenue generators, of course, broadcast. Now, being a new league, that's not something that you can rely on immediately. And I think I've heard you talk about this quite directly too in the past, but sort of how you, when you did your due diligence, but when you're building in startup mode, what is that revenue and sort of distribution strategy now? And how do you think it will evolve over time?
Yeah. So we looked at a lot of leagues around how they went through this. We looked at, Paul Rabel's lacrosse league here in the United States. We looked at NWSL. We looked at MotoGP, and Tigers League. We said to our investors when we started, we believe that this was back to the due diligence. We believe that the audience numbers that have already been shown for these one-off events are really strong, and we can only build from there if we start to tell the story over a season. Then you get you start to get the tonnage that you need for some of these media rights deals. So you can have an event that has 500,000 or a million people watching it in the United States or Europe or wherever. But if you have just one event, it's only worth so much. So now if you start to have multiple events, and within each event, we have 4 competitions. We have a men's snowboard championship from quarters to semis to finals. We have a women's snowboard championship, and then we have the rinse and repeat for skiing. So when you go out and you look at these media rights deals, they all start somewhere and then they grow over time. In a lot of cases, they start as a barter deal, and then the next one has fees associated with it once you start to have proved some of your audience numbers at scale more, and then it grows from there. So we built the business and we said, listen, we believe these media rights fees are going to be very substantial down the road. That said, we want to make a sustainable business where each of our events is sustained before media rights fees. And as we think of our event economics, we often kind of refer to those as our unit economics. If we're going to have an event in New Zealand, if we're going to have an event in Norway or Spain or wherever in the United States or China or Japan, we're looking at the cost of putting on the event, and we're saying, do we feel like through our partnerships, our sponsorships, our ticketing, these other revenue sources, our licensing and merch, whatever it might be, do we feel like we can cover the cost of those events? And in general, we feel pretty good about that. So therefore, we can then allow ourselves to have a long-term view on media rights strategy. And we're very lucky because not every emerging league, some like Tigers can, but not every emerging league can get onto a Eurosport or an NBC. We have enough popularity of our athletes, of our sport, that we were able to get on these big networks, but we also have deals for streaming as well. And so I think, people say, oh, do you go behind the paywall, or do you go with a streamer? Do you, what do you do here? And for us, the answer is pretty straightforward, which is we go and we work with the biggest partners we can to establish the regional league globally. And we also, in certain markets, we do secure media rights fees off the bat with maybe it's a streamer. But our general, if you kind of look around, most of the people who put the Olympics on, the Olympic broadcast partners, in a lot of cases, those are our partners in those regions. And we're very lucky. I think I just signed a deal earlier this week that pushed us from 95 countries in the world to we're now going to be in 175 countries around the world.
Very cool.
Starting with our next event in China. So we're long-term thinking on the media rights piece. And I think that's it's probably one of the single piece of advice I give people who are starting new leagues is don't bank on the media rights dollars right away.
Make it long-term. Yeah.
Well,
and I think I've heard you speak to this, and this really resonated with me, is that, if you were to take a rights deal and hide behind a paywall immediately, you really cap your reach, right? Like you put a ceiling on how many people this can get in front of, and therefore how the interest might grow, and the awareness might grow. So there is a real balance, I'm assuming, to this, that you go, we don't want it up front anyway. It is a long-term vision at a right
honestly,
time.
You can see that even within like some of the biggest leagues, if it's soccer, if it's NFL, even sometimes putting it behind a paywall, it does impede the reach. And so, yes, for an emerging league, I generally think it's probably, if you can afford to, getting the reach before the revenue is not a bad idea.
And just to touch on here, I'm assuming your fan base may be younger than your average, say, NFL, baseball, typical. Would that be correct? More Gen Z than anything else, possibly?
Yeah, I think that's my gut says the same thing. I say my gut because we are still working hard to get the data behind so we had 3.5 million people watch the first event. And I think the next event's going to be far beyond that, because we're adding some deals in major countries like China and Japan that we're working on right now for this upcoming winter. But when you get those audience numbers, they're so skewed to what distribution partner you're working with. If you're on linear TV, they tend to skew older.
This is it. So your Nielsen numbers are only going to get you exactly one picture. Yeah, exactly.
But you look at the sport, you look at the ethos of the sport, you look at the kind of it is a high flying dramatic sport with kids that have they're very, I always say, like, our athletes have that kind of it factor. They're very popular. Maybe there's something about flipping 3 times out of a half pipe that's cool. But and so I think it lends itself to a younger audience. And so therefore the obvious thing we have to do is make sure that we are delivering our content in a way that they consume. But also putting it out there for the masses, which is
for the general, the mainstream. Yeah, for sure. And then just keeping on going on this kind of same thread is that, I'm making some assumptions here, so correct me if I'm wrong, but on location, when you are doing your live events, it is a challenge to get people there to sell tickets. And I'm assuming you're not really, whilst you're also long-term vision on broadcast, that ticket sales to the event itself is probably something, yes, you do, intend to have as a big revenue stream, but it's probably something, again, that you need to balance with, physical attendance, but also digitally engaging. And I'm curious to think about how you're thinking about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, you definitely hit the nail on the head. I mean, we're not in a 100,000 seat stadium. And so we do, when it comes to like general admission, one of the core tenets we developed was that we still want to make this very accessible, and if we can, in many cases, free to show up and enjoy the event. And so
amazing.
We were able to do that in Aspen. We're continuing to do that as we move into China. So there's still a lot of general admission. I would say like 80% of the venue is very low cost, if not free tickets that we're providing throughout the weekend.
Very cool.
We are also building in more experiential pieces, akin to what you see in any other sport. So there's higher end hospitality pieces.
Very cool. I saw this.
And that is where we do expect to see revenue coming in, and that can be generated as you can imagine. Like take golf as an example. There's a huge amount of corporate hospitality associated with golf, and corporate hospitality associated with most of these major leagues. And so I think as we look at really creating a weekend, and that's another thing that people I think you probably heard me say, but it's always good to remind people, the event is one quarter, maybe 25% of the weekend. So it is the highlight, and it's amazing to watch. But starting on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, all the way to Sunday, there's other kinds of parties and activations happening all around the town. And so twist your arm. Would you like to show up in Switzerland for a nice ski weekend and enjoy this event? That I think really appeals to the hospitality side of the business. So we are we kind of bifurcated it a little bit, and we say, look, there's the vast majority of this is general admission, but we are focusing on this hospitality piece, and that is where there will be some revenue coming in that on the ticketing side, if you will.
Yeah, and again, I think you've got this kind of unique advantage. Après kind of vibe is big anyway, right? And you can lean right into that and make that a whole big kind of festival event, no doubt.
And there's a lifestyle, there's a cultural piece of this, which is at these places, at these resorts, you tend to be able to get people influencers, celebrities, athletes who like to come and enjoy it too. And Sean has his own set of friends that, in the sports world that come and enjoy the events. And so I think when you kind of get this mixture of people in a pretty small space, and it's really a unique kind of melting pot, if you will, and
for sure.
not unlike what you might see at a paddock club in an F1 or around a weekend in Monaco or Miami. And that's, we're trying to sort of be very careful about building that in. It's a much smaller piece of the puzzle, but it is something that we're focused on building an experience for all levels of fan.
Yeah, awesome. I hope to make it one day for sure. Now, really kind of moving on into what I would call the global macro view of this, right? You spoke about this before. There's, it's nearly double not quite the participants of, say, compared to golf, people that ski and board on a regular. You've spoken about the third, right? So this is really truly a global sport, and your next event coming in China. Now, one thing that I've recently come across is just how hard China are going at this kind of industry, right? Like the ice and snow economy. And some of the numbers astounded me, 500 million, I think they want in tourism, people coming in tourism, and then this sort of booming bottom line of, I think it was $206 billion that they want to add to their economy. You're headed there next. Tell me about China. I think, you spoke about having to create new socials. I'm assuming you're meaning things like WeChat, really it's a different market, right? So tell me about the journey here. I think it's going to be an exciting event to go back into Beijing, So let us hear it.
All right. So good timing, because Sean, myself, Miles Nathan, who's Sean's business manager and been his friend since they were 8, we went over to China, and Miles is also on our board. So we basically went over to China and Japan 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. And we went to Beijing. We landed in Beijing on 5 a.m. on Monday, and we ended up going to Shanghai the next day for 2 days, then Tokyo, and then home all in 1 week. So we really got a whirlwind. We met a bunch of the athletes. And I think if you remember back to how I sort of think about these things as an entrepreneur, like it's always kind of have to test and learn, going to be
Yeah.
data driven. I also have this very strong belief that I don't know that much. Like there's everyone I hire knows a lot more than I do about what they're doing. And same thing applies to China. Like I cannot tell you how we should run this event in China. I'm not the right person to. But so the first thing we did is we went over and we hired 3 different agencies in China: one marketing agency, an operations agency, and a partnerships group that are going to support the league in the event in China itself. And so our team here, and most of our teams in the United States, we have some people elsewhere, but our team here still is applying the fundamental principles of what's our vision, how do we want to do it, but how we actually like execute the weekend in China. It looks really different than what we do in Aspen. And all of this kind of bubbles back to this really interesting concept that Sean wants each event to, just like F1, Monaco is different from Vegas. It's the same track to some degree, even the track's different, but like, but the theme, so we have these themes of each of the events, one is more of an Aspen event. This one is what people in China would want to see in Beijing. And so when we were over there, I think a lot of what we talked about is that the Beijing event will be the Beijing event. And of course, a lot of it will be similar because it's the same competition. But what we do there and even the types of merchandise we have and the types of programming around it. So bringing in some collabs with, some new and up and coming fashion designers in China, things like that.
Yeah, cool.
That's been, and the same thing in Switzerland, right? So I there's this playbook that's developing around kind of a core principle as we go to each place, but then the wrapper around it is we're trying to make it as authentic as we can to the country. And that's been, it's been received well in the sense that we're not coming in and saying, this is how we're going to do it.
Yeah. So you're not square peg into a round hole, but you're really kind of coming up, I guess, with an application layer of your product, right? Like this is the core, and when we apply it, you get the different kind of the vibe that might be with what you are.
And then the fun stuff, I mean, that's just like businessy side, but then the fun, the scale is just wildly different than I'm used to. You put something on TV in China on the right distribution partner, and the numbers of people that can watch it is like it almost breaks your models. You're like, that doesn't seem quite right. But you put it, you're on the news. So in Japan at the first event, a bunch of Japanese news outlets, the major ones, came and took our news access feeds and put them on the news in Japan. And 61 million people, according to Nielsen, 61 million people cumulatively saw all of the Snow League in Japan. You look at how, like, getting on the news in China, the numbers of people that can be exposed to the brand, it's so big. So it's there's some scale differences, and the fandom. There's something about I've been telling people that this sport was kind of growing and becoming more and more popular over the last 20, 30 years in the United States and Europe. I think you're at the beginning of that curve in China, for example. And so it is, I think, more at the resort we're going to, north of Beijing, apparently 75-80% of the people snowboard. And so it's which to us, we have both, but it's just an interesting thing. Like there's a youth culture to it. They're really excited about the sport. And I think there's a ton of growth to be had in Asian markets.
I agree. And, certainly the reports that I saw was this over 800 resorts, maybe some are being built now, but, there's this real plan for this to be such a big part of their economy moving forward. Pretty exciting place for you guys.
I don't know this. I've heard this. This is hearsay, but I think it's true. They have an indoor 22-foot half pipe in China. And you start to ask yourself, the Asian athletes, some of them are really doing well in the competitions around the world. And so you look at the training facilities, like, I think we'll start to see stuff beefed up in the US and Europe. And we see more half pipes being made. And I think it's like they're really starting to push the limit on training,
what's possible. Yeah.
Physio, things like that. And it's great. It's great for the whole sport.
Yeah. And I mean, this brings me nicely to a part that I would love to quickly ask you about as well. But, from me, I guess in sports innovation, I'm interested in these kind of alternate and emerging leagues and how they're kind of responding to the market, but also this kind of model of arena based, right? And you've touched on it here of what's possible, as technology improves, as people, start to think beyond. But, clearly as an outdoor sport and one that could be under threat, with climate change and, sometimes here in New Zealand, we get fickle snow seasons, every now and then. Do you think there's ever a space for the league that's indoor, or at least a stop that's indoor, or is outdoors always the goal?
Definitely.
Yeah,
is the answer. And I won't leave you hanging on one word there, but Sean has already done, there have already been indoor competitions, and not necessarily in half pipe. But I think it is I think it's really important to bring the sport, outside of the mountains when we can, and how we do that is going to be something that we haven't decided exactly what that looks like yet. Goes back to the kind of core concept of let's get what we're doing right first, which is make sure that we're going to the places where the sport is already in, infrastructure's in place. But that is a big piece of the puzzle for us and I think we think about it as just many of the kind of expansions that we look to do as we grow. And I'm excited because, even if we've had a lot of interest from countries who want us to come and bring the snow league to that country, and some don't have as much snow, some but are really interested in what you just described. So we're paying attention to it, and we're going to do our diligence on it. And I think when the time is right, we'll start to pilot. And I think one of the key things we can do is, because we've been so focused on this thing we're building, and it's a really clean vision for us. I think we've given ourselves that ability to take chances in places. And if we present them in the right way, like, hey, we're going to pilot this thing, and it's going to be a bit different, and we're going to do it this way. You see that in a lot of sports, they'll use like the minor leagues to pilot something.
To innovate.
So I think as we think about it, there's kind of opportunities for us to keep our core, but then start to innovate in smart ways.
Yeah, no, excellent. Okay. And to kind of bring us home now, paint us a picture. Think about projecting us forward. It's 2030. What is the Snow League by then? Well, what do you hope it is by then, I should ask?
Yeah, well, we are very tied to an Olympic cycle in our minds, because we have a big Olympics coming up, and Sean is doing a very big piece of that in Italy. So 2030, you've got me already. So I think France is hosting the Winter Olympics then. We are probably in the range of 10 plus events around the world at that point. And we are, we have probably expanded beyond just half pipe for men's and women's snowboarding and skiing. I hope that, and I know Sean hopes this too, that the prize purses that we can offer continue to grow for the athletes. And I think we have to be fiscally responsible about that as as a league, to make sure it's sustainable. And the whole audience around the world and the folks who are able to access the sport grows as well. And I think that's, it goes back to trying to make sure that we're able to do these. If we can let people in who can, don't have to spend a lot of money to come see the sport, first of all, but then we can go to places like you mentioned, where maybe it's not as common to see these events. I think that's really exciting. It's just part of growing the sport. Sean, if you remember, he grew up in San Diego. So he's a kid from the beach who ended up becoming the best, and who didn't really love the weather, who ended up becoming the best in the world in a winter
Anything's
sport.
possible, right? But he was into skateboarding too, though. I've seen him skateboard. He's phenomenal.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's kind of one of the things is I'd love to be in South Asia at some point. I'd love to see a kid come out of parts of the world that, we don't expect. So, when I people ask me, the simple answer is think F1, poking around the world in the winter locations and us doing that. But there is like more about telling the stories of the athletes and getting more people to love and understand and participate in the sport. That's obviously a big piece of the puzzle. And then what Sean would tell you, I'm sure, is that it's really about the athletes, right? So right now we know that we're trying to put a sport in place where it's safer for athletes. So how the half pipes are cut, the conditions, all these things we're paying very close attention to, and also that they can make enough money to support themselves in their careers as an athlete in the snow league. Hopefully we're in a really good place where we've kind of come from here and we've notched it up several spots by 2030.
Awesome. Very, very cool. Well, thank you, Omer. I have been thoroughly impressed by your approach thus far. Great to chat to you. Is there anything else you'd like to add? Obviously, let us know where people can find out more, people can follow along, and maybe just drop the dates of China, because I know it's December, I think. But yeah, we'd love for the listeners to be able to know where to find you when the time comes.
Yeah, so China's December 4th to 6th. I would say go to our website, snowleague.com. You'll see all the dates and also when we're broadcasting and what networks. As we get closer to the events, those will be there, and then you can check us out on all our socials. And thank you for having me on this podcast. Really was looking forward to it and enjoyed it very much.
Thanks, Omer.
Thank you for listening to the Sports Pundit podcast, kindly produced by the amazing team at O6. I'll include more information about the guests and the topics covered in the show notes. Head to sportspundit.co to find previous editions, access the newsletter, and to sign up for our WhatsApp group and see upcoming social events in cities around the world. See you again soon.